Hello, everybody. Welcome to one of my favorite things to talk about in the visual arts classroom. This video presentation is going to take us through some really interesting concepts and ideas that is exciting to me because it combines a lot of different content areas, such as the sciences with regards to psychology, biology, how our brains work, how our eyes work, and then some really higher level cognition and thinking about and talking about reality, what we see, the context of things, what is truth, what is fact, what is fiction, who knows, all with the idea of learning how to see the world, which is something that I think is extremely important that you gain in a visual arts classroom. We call it visual literacy, learning how to see, learning how to communicate what we see. And this is very important to learning how to draw, learning how to take pictures or design something or makes anything visually focused. The preliminary goal with all of that is knowing how to see things. You can't draw something until you learn how to see it more accurately. And without further ado, let's get to looking at some optical illusions, talking about how we see and how the brain works. So the place we really must start is a question. It's the first question I always ask my class. Do you see objective, accurate reality? Do you think that what you are looking at in the world is objectively accurate, that what you see is real, it's a fact, those things exist in the way that you're seeing them? And so the answer is kind of staring you in the face right now, because you are probably looking at the balls floating around this question, these spheres, and I'm going to guess that you see them as being different color spheres, that you kind of see one that's more blue, one that's more red, one that's more yellow, that they're different shades. Especially if you look at the question in the middle, you see those as being very different colors. When the truth is, all those spheres were exactly the same color. And here is the two objects or the two images shown differently, right? One has different color lines going over the spheres, and the other has those lines removed and faded into the background. And as you can see, these spheres are all exactly the same color. And if you really try hard to focus on each individual sphere where the colors are going over it, where the lines of color are going over it, you'll see that you see that as the same color as the sphere on the right. And then I'll move to the one that looks more yellow, and I'll look at it really closely, and I'll see it as pretty much the same color as the ones on the right, and the one that's more red. So when you focus your gaze in a very specific area, when you can remove some of the other context from the image, you can start to see it a little bit more accurately. But at the end of the day, it's very hard to overwrite your brain to see it accurately. So the question remains, is what we see real? And how do we see is the other part of that question. And so let's take it a step further. Two of my favorite optical illusions are on the screen right in front of you right now. The one with the two tables on the left is got to be my all-time favorite, and one that really shocks people in the classroom. And so the question is, are the two tables the exact same size? Meaning that is the one on the left just as long and wide as the one on the right? Does it appear like the one on the left goes further back into space, is a much longer, thinner table, and the one on the right is a much kind of more square, wider table, right? One's more rectangular, one's closer to square. Do they look like that, right? Well, the truth is that they are the same size table. They're exactly the same size, and I'll prove it to you in a little bit. With the one on the right, the grayish square box of some sort. I don't really know exactly what it's supposed to be. The question is the gray that you see on the top, the main color, the same or different as the gray that you see on the bottom shape, the bottom half? Does it look like the one at the bottom is lighter in value, and that the one on the top is darker in value? And the truth is that those two shades are exactly the same color. And if you take your finger and block out the middle portion, like just put it in your perspective where your finger goes and focus on that shape, and just block out that middle lighter portion where that looks like the sun is hitting the object. Just block that out, and you'll see that the two values, shades of gray, are exactly the same, but you're seeing them as different. And so why is that? And a big part of that answer is the context. Basically, the main thing to think about is that this is a two-dimensional image. It's not an actually three-dimensional object, but your brain perceives it as three-dimensional because it's meant to look three-dimensional. And in that way, it tricks your brain. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to prove the tables to you. So I traced both of these tables, and you're welcome to do the same with your computer screen if you want. And I drew it out on a sheet of paper, and then I cut out a green shape that is the exact same size as the one on the left. And what you'll see is I'm going to move that green piece of paper in front of the one object. So here you'll see it. So it's that size, and you move it over, and it's exactly the same size. Going back one more time to show you, this green shape there looks long, thin, and I'm going to move it over here. Oop, it just got wider, fatter, right? So that's proof. You can stop this video, rewatch it as many times as you want. You may not trust me that I actually trace these images exactly, but I did. And that's the result you get. Those two shapes are basically exactly the same size, but you see them differently. And that's really important. Why you see them differently is important to understanding how to see and understanding that what you see is not necessarily real. So what's happening? The first, I brought up context is very important. That one object with the gray values is meant to look three-dimensional, but it's actually two-dimensional. It was on your computer screen. It was designed two-dimensionally to look three-dimensional. But really, even before that, you need to understand that you do not see with your eyes, you see with your brain. And think about a camera, that your eyes are really the lens that light is traveling through. But the processing chip in the camera, or the film, is what really absorbs that information and turns it into something useful. And that's your brain in this context. Your brain is like the film, where your eyes are the lens, and light is coming through your eyes, and it's going to your visual cortex, which happens to be in the back of the brain. And your cortex is really important, and it does a lot of different things. It's really responsible for our sense of logic, decision-making, a lot of things that are not necessarily related to emotions, which comes from the limbic system. And your brain basically puts that information together. And here's the part that matters. Your brain evolved to process that information in a way that is useful, not that's necessarily accurate. And it also evolved at a time that doesn't exist anymore. It evolved in a time where we didn't have two-dimensional surfaces that look three-dimensional. So your brain takes a lot of shortcuts, it makes a lot of guesses, and it's based off of evolving in a world and understanding a world that really has changed quite significantly. So the reason that you see the two shades of that one gray object as being the same is because your brain perceives those as a three-dimensional object. So let's go back to it for a sec. Your brain sees this gray object as three-dimensional, and therefore the way that the light must be hitting it, it means that the light is directly hitting that top shape, and you're just getting reflected light at the bottom. And that means that the one at the top must be darker because there's less light hitting the one at the bottom. So your brain makes a guess. It assumes, it makes tons of assumptions in your world about the way things are. And in this case, it makes those shapes, those two values, look like different colors, even though, or different shades, even though they're exactly the same. And the same is true with the two tables. So that is a two-dimensional surface. It's a two-dimensional drawing meant to look three-dimensional. You are a three-dimensional being, but you see in two dimensions, right? Your world is basically can be represented in two dimensions, like on a sheet of paper like this. I can move my hand through a three-dimensional world, but I see it as basically being flat. That's why I can take a picture and pretty much exactly represent what I'm seeing in the world, right? And that table those tables look like they're three-dimensional, like they exist in space, but they're actually just two-dimensional, and your brain is being tricked. And if those were three-dimensional objects, it means that the one on the left must be going so much further back into space that it's longer and thinner, whereas the one on the right is not, and it must be wider. So the fact that you are seeing this, the context tricks your brain. Your brain makes assumptions, and you see it the way that your brain wants you to see it, and you can't unsee it. That's one of the scary parts. So the very first step in learning how to see is really understanding that we don't see things accurately, and then we can start to use that to our advantage. And I'll get to that in a moment. But just a quick comment on the cortex, limbic system, and the brainstem, because this is also going to come up in this class quite a bit. It's very important to understand where your thoughts come from, where your emotions come from, so that you can use those to your advantage. I say this quite often. I have a TED Talk where I said it. You'll watch this in the future. We feel before we think. And that's because the limbic system is responsible for a lot of how we feel and react to feelings. And that is the core of our brain. It's basically, if you think of like the brain evolving out from the core, your limbic system evolved before your cortex did, and the cortex evolved around it. So if we are having very strong feelings, we might not be able to access our cortex, which will allow us to think more logically. And this happens a lot with regards to being in a state of alarm or having very strong negative emotions, even really strong positive emotions. Think about like how us being in love makes us not think so clearly, right? If these feelings overwhelm us to the point that our brain kind of goes into that state of being, and the brainstem is actually a part of this too. It's like your nervous system. So your feelings kind of shoot down your brainstem, kind of causing your whole body to react to those emotions and getting stuck in a state of alarm, or maybe even extreme bliss. We're not as able to access our cortex. And we really need to be able to access our cortex to be able to see things more accurately, for good reason, and to ask questions and think logically about what we're looking at, because we know that we're maybe not seeing this logically, right? And we know that our brain plays tricks on us and we're not seeing the world accurately. So what can we do to learn to see things in a better way? And that's not to say that emotions aren't a good thing, or that they're negative. They're extremely positive. We can use them in very powerful, productive ways, but we have to learn how to manage our feelings. And that's something we'll talk about as well in this class. So I talked a lot about the context of three-dimensional versus two-dimensional. And here's another example of that, right? So you have a 2-point perspective in the bottom left corner. So it's a drawing that's meant to look like it's three-dimensional using 2-point perspective, which is a drawing technique where you have a horizon line and you draw your lines out from the horizon line in a continual direction. And that way you can kind of always figure out like how things will get larger or smaller as they come closer to you. That's why when you look at something that's far away, it looks very tiny, right? And it's not that car that's across the street from me right now is this big. It's just that it's far away, and perspective changes that. The other thing, our brains evolved in a world that has one singular light source. And this is also very important to think about, because shadows, and with that gray shape, was tricking us. Shadows are really important in how our brain understands context of something. And that that image, that illusion was using shadows in a very direct way. So we evolved in a world that just had the sun as a singular light source, and our brains evolved to see a world that is most useful in that world, not necessarily what is most accurate. And that's also why you can get situations like the image on the right, where you have the Trompe l'oeil, where you have these very photorealistic images that are done, drawn, painted. Sometimes they're made of chalk to create what looks like a real world, but is not. That looks like hyper realistic, and that's just a flat street, but it looks like it's a huge canyon where people are balancing on the edges of it. And again, this is why your brain can be tricked in that way. So here's a couple others that I love to show students as well, just to kind of continue that idea and that thought.
The strangest window in the entire world. It's called the
Ames. And this one here, well, basically what it does is
window, and we showed it to you 3 years ago on an electric. And we showed it to you 3 years ago on an electric motor, spinning around, and it did strange things to your brain because it's an optical illusion. Well, we had so many letters about it that we just...
In multiple windows. Okay, let's get back to it. So the Ames window. You can watch this video. It's from the Curiosity Show. It's the Ames window. What I basically want to show you...
The strangest window in the entire...
this is basically a two-dimensional object that's meant to look three-dimensional, right? Something we've talked about quite a bit. He goes through the step-by-step process on how to make it. And what's cool about it is when it spins, it's about when it spins, what you're going to see...
I'll hold it the same level as your eyes.
Let him do the talking.
Let it go. Now you know that it's turning around in circles. In fact, if you look at it from above, you can see that it's turning around in a circle. But now your brain is doing something strange. It's telling you that it's not going around in a circle, but it's oscillating. In other words, it's turning part way, stopping, and then going back the other way. Now that's a strange effect, isn't it? But if you think that's strange, wait till I add something through the middle. What am I going to add? Well, I'm going to add a ballpoint pen. And to do that, I've placed a little piece of double...
So I highly recommend checking that out, going back and watching that if you want. He's basically going to put a three-dimensional object, a ballpoint pen. He's going to tape it to it, and this is pretty crazy what happens here. And again, your brain is being fooled by the fact that this is not a three-dimensional object. It's meant to look three-dimensional, and the spinning causes your brain to get a little bit confused. And watch what happens with the pen.
Be able to see that the pen is going around in a circle and not going backwards and forwards. But what's your brain going to tell you about the window? Will your brain allow you to see the window going around in a circle with the pen? Or are you going to see something really strange? Well, have a look at that. That's unbelievable, isn't it? You can see the pen going around in a circle, but your brain is telling you that the window is going part way around and turning and going the other way. And yet in order to do that, the two things have to pass through one another, the pen and the window. You know it's not possible. You know it can't happen. And yet as you look at it, you see them going through one another every time they go around. An amazing illusion. The Ames.
So, and then here's another one I like to show. This is a T-Rex. It's a piece of cardboard. So this is just a piece of cardboard. It is folded, but it's not moving. It can't move. It's just cardboard. And it looks like the T-Rex is following you, but it's not. It's just a piece of cardboard that's incapable of movement, but your brain sees it as moving, right? Right now, it looks like that T-Rex's head is moving and following you. For some reason, this video does it with 8 of them. That's fine with me. You can watch this video at Brustpup. It's amazing T-Rex illusion. So now there's 8 of them that look like they're following you. These, I promise you, these T-Rexes are not moving. They're not following you at all. And then you're going to see with this larger one, the camera is going to go all the way around the object at one point. This T-Rex head is not moving, right? It's just a piece of cardboard. And here we're going to go around it. you're going to be able to see that it's just a piece of cardboard. That's really what it is. It's folded. And you see it right, and then your brain's going to switch back to seeing it wrong, right? So even though you know now that that's a piece of cardboard, you'll see it right for a little bit, but then your brain switches back to seeing it wrong. So this is really important to keep in mind when you are thinking about the world and learning how to see. One of my ultimate favorite videos is actually, or Optical Illusions is this one. So you know, being tricked is one thing. Being able to unsee things that are actually right in front of you is a whole nother level of illusion. So what I want you to do is watch this video and focus on the flashing dot in the middle.
This illusion depends on your ability to focus and not be distracted. With this illusion, you must fixate on the flashing spot in the middle of the screen. As you stare at the flashing spot, the surrounding yellow spots will gradually vanish from your consciousness, one by one. As soon as you let your eyes wander, the effect is broken and the dots reappear. So you must focus and fixate on the flashing spot to make the dots vanish. This illusion, therefore, can be used to measure your ability to focus and hold your attention despite distractions. If you can only make...
So you might be noticing that if you focus on the flashing dot in the middle, the yellow dots around the edge start to disappear, fade away. Sometimes they're like half there. There's no tricks happening. It is your brain doing that. It's basically making the decision that those dots don't exist anymore. And there's a couple of reasons why. So one of them is this is the Troxler effect at full force, which is basically the idea that rigidly fixating your gaze on something in the visual field, so like really focusing on one thing in your visual field, can cause the surrounding stationary, so non-moving images, to fade or disappear. And then what they're replaced with is basically they're replaced with an experience that's determined by the context of the world. And again, your brain is very focused on context. So, or the background, right? The things going on in the background. And this is known as filling in. So your brain actually like fills in this space. One of the things that you might be aware of is if you get a scratch on your eye, you might see that scratch for a while, but eventually your brain will get rid of the scratch. So you'll stop seeing that. Even though the scratch hasn't healed, it's still there. Your brain has basically just removed it from your field of vision. Everybody should be able to see their nose when they're staring in front of them, but we don't go around like seeing our nose because our brain has kind of like removed that from our field of vision, even though it's there. And this really illuminates the importance of two things. One is saccades, which is like the involuntary movement of your eyes, right? Like your eye just kind of like will randomly kind of like look around or change its position a little bit, because that basically removes your focus and allows you to kind of like see things a little bit more accurately. Because when we do focus on one thing rigidly, our peripheral goes in, is not very strong. And on the right, there's a little example of like just how small our focus of vision is, our area of our vision, the field of vision that we can see very accurately is very small. It's that little red dot in the middle, and everything else is peripheral, which is like fuzzy and hazy. So when we stare at that dot, that flashing dot in the middle, right, we're focusing our attention. The yellow dots on the edges go into our peripheral. Our brain fills them in because of the context of the fact that those red X's are moving around. The yellow dots are not playing along with that reality. So therefore, they're probably not as important to us. And because of our field of vision being kind of wonky, they can disappear completely. If you can get a really good focus going on that flashing dot, you will lose those yellow dots completely, right? Part of this is also that our brain has placed a greater emphasis on moving things because those could be a potential danger, versus stagnant objects that would not present any immediate danger. So we would want to be able to focus on the things that are moving and see those more clearly than the stationary things. Like imagine like a predator about to attack us in the wild. So what trying to say is that your point of view matters considerably with how you see things, with how you see reality. And think about that in a larger context of the world, disagreements people have with each other. This doesn't mean that facts don't exist. We know that the world is round, even though we might not see it that way from our point of view, right? We have other things that we need to look at to get to maybe understand the world more accurately. We have microscopes, telescopes that allow us to see things that we can't see with our own eyes, that help us build a more accurate view of reality. And this is exactly the point. So, and again, in the picture on the left here, that's a forced perspective where the person is really far away and the background looks really tiny. But it also can be used, with the house for sale. Look at that huge pool that they have for sale with this house. The truth is, the pool is very small, and it's our perspective that makes it look large. So think about that. When you're looking at something and you have a disagreement with someone else about how to see it, well, is that a 6 or a 9? From one person's perspective, it's a 9, and one person's perspective, it's a 6. But there might be a correct answer here. It might be a 6, and that you can look for other signs to kind of show why it's a 6. Look at another number. Is there another number before this number laying on the ground? That might give you that context to understand it. What you might be able to tell, like, is it supposed to be written from one person's perspective versus the other person's perspective? There are ways to figure out whether or not it's a 6 or a 9. So that's how we can sometimes figure out things that are accurate. When we put our finger to block the center of that object, we were using our bodies to help our brain and eyes process that information. And so when you're learning how to draw, why is this so important? Because you need to really spend some time looking at things to make sure that you see them accurately so that you can represent that as accurately as possible. And if you just start trying to draw something, I think you're going to probably get it wrong. And what we have to do is start by simplifying and using guides that we have in the world to help us more accurately see things. So when you see people holding up their pencil to kind of measure things, right? If I was going to draw a symmetrical object, drawing a line through the middle before I draw the other side, so I make sure to keep that object symmetrical, and having a line through the middle helps me to do that. We need to simplify. What do you see in the shape? This is basically two major shapes where you have a triangular element on the top coming down with that top, and then the bowl shape at the bottom that can have a circular component in the middle with a bottom, right? So we want to break things into simple forms so that we can see them more accurately and use other things as context to help us measure those items more accurately with our eyes. And in photography, this also means using our perspective to enhance the viewer's experience. So when photographing or composing an image, you start by simplifying what you see and then focusing on the context relationships, and not always trusting, but using those perspectives, tilting the camera, turning the camera, having a high angle, having a low angle, changing our perspective, the audience's perspective, because they see what you're seeing through the camera, to enhance their experience in a powerful way. Lastly, I really suggest checking out these videos. One is from the Shots of Awe YouTube channel, Expanding Our Perception. I love to use this as an introduction to talking about perspective and things like that. And if you are in my photo class, you will definitely be watching the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows video. So you can watch it now, but you will also have an assignment tied to that video that talks about why the camera is has such a profound impact on the way that we see time and experience the world. So thanks for watching. And I look forward to teaching you how to see the world a little bit more accurately throughout the semester or year of this course. Bye.